Welcome to the Chinese Canadian Museum podcast, The School Room. I'm your host, Melissa Lee, CEO of the museum. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we are thrilled to have the multi-talented artist Ming Wong with us in Vancouver. Ming currently lives and works in Berlin, and his interdisciplinary practice incorporates performance, video, and installation, often unraveling ideas of authenticity and the other with reference to the act of human performativity. In recent years, he's had strong theatrical interests in the intersection of sci-fi and traditional Chinese culture, particularly Cantonese opera, but for our purposes, also Cantopop and Mandopop. We just opened our brand new feature exhibition, Dream Factory, Cantopop Mandopop 1980s to 2000, where Ming's artwork, in collaboration with Canadian artist Liam Morgan, plays a central part in the exhibition. Ming, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm very, very happy to be here.
So why don't we go back a little bit and talk about your interest and how we came to do this project?
Yes, there's so many things to talk about. I'm trying to figure out where to start. I have had a long desire to come to Vancouver to do some research because I had always been interested in cultural identity. I was born in Singapore as a third generation Cantonese, a Chinese Singaporean. And I've always been interested in finding out about my place in the world. How do I see myself and how can I control how other people see me? This is a kind of a question that I carrying with me throughout my life, my career. And Vancouver was always on the map. I had previously done research in San Francisco and Los Angeles, looking at the history of the Chinatowns there. And some of that was incorporated into some early works of mine.
When I think of Singapore, I think of it as a real hybrid culture. It's interesting that you say that you are a Cantonese person that grew up in Singapore. Singapore, primarily, what I understand is the language is Mandarin, but many people speak Cantonese. Malaysians are there, as well as South Asian people, Indian people live there.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a real kind of cross-pollination of different cultures. Did that influence you growing up?
Yes. And, all that is kind of grafted onto you. It's a form of social conditioning. And in a sense, in the case of Singapore, it was really how does a young nation create an identity, a national identity? Part of that is to kind of get all the different sections of community to cohabit, to live together, to find balance and harmony. And within the Chinese community, it meant flattening that out by getting the community to study Mandarin as the main Chinese language in the schools, even though most of the immigrants were from South China and had roots in Hokkien, Teochew, Cantonese Hakka, Hainanese roots, etc. And I've lost part of that aspect of my identity. And hence, when I was a young artist, I did try to rediscover that by studying traditional Chinese art, for example, which was very unfashionable, still very unfashionable at the time, and traveling to Hong Kong. In later years, when I was a practicing artist, where I was dealing with the history of cinema, I looked at early Hong Kong cinema, which was related to the Cantonese opera troupes, who were making films in the daytime and performing on stage in the nighttime, and who I discovered crossed the Pacific from Hong Kong to the Pacific Northwest. In the early 20s and 30s, they were here and encountered cinema and country music and other cultural influences which they absorbed and took back with them across the Pacific to China via Hong Kong. This was the start of a kind of adaptation and modernization of the art form. They would be doing Cantonese opera, movies, but they would talk about contemporary life. You can still see some of these black and white Cantonese opera movies where they are dressed in suits, where ladies have permed hair and driving cars and talking about having a party in Central and Hong Kong. It was quite remarkable because I realized how an art form like Cantonese opera could be so adaptive. They could be used to talk about issues of the day and absorb cultural influences from all over. And hence, I started to have an idea of making my own work, which eventually led to the planning of science fiction Cantonese opera cinema project, which I hope to develop here in Vancouver.
What is this ongoing interest in science fiction? Like, how does that interact with this idea of performance and reenactment and transnational Chinese history?
Well, it's not true that I've always been interested in science fiction. It only came about really in the last 10 years when I was spending time in Hong Kong
Mm-hmm.
doing research on this subject and try to imagine how I can use this art form, which people think it's so old, but really had a kind of a very modern, very adaptable quality. I was trying to see if it could be used to talk about current day issues and also about the future.
It's speculative.
And if you think about 10 years ago, and especially in the art world, there was a lot of speculation about capital flowing out of mainland China.
Mm-hmm.
The art market really opened up in Hong Kong with the arrival of the Art Basel Art Fair, for example, and numerous galleries. There was a lot of optimism. And of course, within that 10 years, things really changed. And so what was really at the back of my mind was, things are moving so quickly. How do we keep track of that? And as an artist, how can we express that? And so the idea of speculative fiction was a platform in which I think you could imagine the future, what if, or futures that you would like to have that maybe could serve the purpose of inspiring people. And so I also quickly realized that what I wanted to do had to happen outside of Hong Kong.
Right.
That I wanted to find a place where it had enough connections, but also enough distance from the mothership. And Vancouver, I thought, allowed me to have that space. When I first came to Vancouver 2 years ago, I realized there was a large Chinese community. There's a large Cantonese community. There was a still current strong connection to Hong Kong immigration.
For sure. We're in the fifth wave.
And everyone I met, whether you're Chinese or not, were aware of. They acknowledge the presence and history of this segment of the population, without me having to retell the whole history of the Chinese diaspora, where I've had to in other parts of the world. I found a ready audience who were eager to go on this journey of discovery with me.
And there's this speculative nature of being an immigrant, I think, as you say, when you are leaving your home and imagining a new world to live in, and sometimes moving by yourself and leaving your family behind, sometimes reinventing yourself. That's, in essence, really when you think about those early Chinese immigrants and some of them that were in these Cantonese opera troupes that traveled around, it was almost like a reinvention process or a speculative process that one can imagine. I wanted to talk a little bit maybe about the show. I think going back to thinking about how we started thinking of Dream Factory, it was really just an idea at the beginning. And it was an idea that really was helped along by you coming last year and being guest teaching and co-teaching a course at SFU.
And you told me the idea of making a show about Cantopop. And I immediately latched onto that because, well, personally, I grew up with Cantopop and karaoke. That was something that was very much in my family. We had a karaoke machine at home with laserdiscs.
Who is your favorite singer?
I think I followed Jackie Chan.
Yeah.
I guess it was the songs were the easiest to sing.
Well, he's actually the best singer of the 4 Heavenly Kings, I would say, out of the 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also, knew that there was a very strong connection between Cantopop and whatever I was researching, where Cantonese opera and its connection to America, to the West, really paved the way for the hybridization of the Cantonese song. And so, if you look at the history of Cantopop, it can be traced already to the 20s, 30s.
It's definitely traced to Shanghai and the immigration from Shanghai jazz to Hong Kong. And then, of course, it's the articulation and the singing in Cantonese.
Also, the appearance of gramophones,
Yeah.
technology, and the cinema. And Cantonese were one of the first to exploit the technology by mass producing these records.
And part of the growth, to me, it really felt like was because Hong Kong was such a hybridization of so many different cultures together. I mean, we talked earlier about Singapore, but also Hong Kong because it was Chinese, it was colonized by the British. So many Shanghainese immigrants came over in those key early years. The other major event, I think, was the Beatles in '64 when they came to visit and created a craze in Hong Kong of pop songs, and many bands, including, I think, a really famous Singaporean band, started singing Beatle covers.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
So if we're talking post-Second World War, new nations, Singapore was blossoming as a port city, and as was Hong Kong. Meanwhile, mainland China was really closing itself off as a communist China. And in a way, both Hong Kong and Singapore were the exporters of popular Chinese culture. There was a huge record industry based in Singapore as well. So not just Chinese language music recordings, but there was an emphasis on making cover versions of hits from Japan, from Europe, from the West. And yes, there was Singapore and Hong Kong versions of the Beatles. All the trends that you saw in the West, they were very quickly kind of like imitated.
That's like a key part of the Dream Factory show. The selection of music videos, many that were and are reenactment of English pop songs. Sally Ye redoing Madonna's Material Girl, and then Sheena Easton redone by Anita Mui as Bad Girl. There's all of these reenactments in the show, which I think is really a key part of the exhibition, that it wasn't about originality, it was about reenactment for particular cultures.
Yes, and I think also the cultural flexibility to take something and turn it into your own. I think that's also a kind of a form of improvisation and creative intelligence. It's easy to call it just imitation, but in many cases, it actually improved on the original, I have to say.
We can talk maybe more specifically about the work. So the work that you put together, which is really a mixed media installation. It features custom-made architecture made of over 100 laser discs, LED lights, steel, and aluminum. Aluminum clads the stage. There's a 2-channel video projection with a stereo soundscape. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about how you thought of this, and then maybe we can then talk about the title, Vast Ocean, Endless Skies.
Yes, so I remember that when we first spoke, you had asked me to think about designing a kind of karaoke stage.
A stage.
A stage.
Yes, because I saw the stage you did in Singapore. You did a stage in Beijing a long time ago, the UCCA, and then Rock Bund.
Yes.
So I said, Ming, I want a stage.
Yes, I love the theater. Another aspect of my life was working in the theater as a playwright in my younger days in Singapore. And so the space of the stage, on stage, backstage, is very close to my heart. And I had made a kind of a spaceship. I called it the Wayang spaceship, which was adapted from the traveling Chinese theater stages that you have in Singapore, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia, which was made out of timber, out of maritime timber, and was a traveling theater structure. And I collaborated with the craftsmen who did that. Unfortunately, that is now stopped because Mr. Lee, who was the last surviving one who had the materials and know-how, has retired. But we adapted it, and we had used some modern materials in terms of like dichroic films, which changes color on the surfaces that we use to design the scenography, and the use of fluorescent lights that were always flickering according to a program. So it was a light installation. There was also video and sound, and it only activated after 7 p.m. at night, because it was outdoors at the back of the Singapore Art Museum. And it was a tribute to the traditional outdoor Chinese theater stage, where they only came alive only when the sun came down. And so that was the first iteration of a kind of, it looked like a spaceship from far away, but as you approached it, you realize, oh, it's actually made of wood. The structure looks actually is based on a traditional street opera, or the wayang is what they call it in Singapore. And then for Vancouver, I thought, right, we need to make something that carries on to the phenomenon of Cantopop. And for me, that's synonymous with karaoke.
Of course.
And for me, material-wise, karaoke is the laserdisc from the 80s.
Yeah, 80s and 90s, it was the time period. It was this capsule moment that then moved on to CDs, which now also no longer exist.
Yes. And for those who don't know what a laserdisc is, it's really a larger version of the compact disc, of the CD. It's the size of a vinyl record, but the entire surface is this coated plastic that glimmers with the light, right? And you had a stack of them here in the office at the Chinese Canadian Museum, and I asked to borrow a few just to do some tests, some experiments. And so in the flat I was staying here in Vancouver, there was a table lamp, and I just removed the, what do you call it, lamp cover, and put the laser disc where the light bulb was, all right? And I discovered that it made these beautiful concentric circles of colored light. And you totally mesmerized. And so I started to do a process of testing with different kind of light bulbs and different colors. And from this early experiments with light and laserdisc, I came up with the current design of what I think looks like a spaceship, but it's a karaoke stage. It consists of how many? Like, I think almost 100.
Over 100. But so over the course of the year, we reached out, and Fairchild Radio helped us. We reached out a call out to all Vancouver Canadian Chinese people if they had any laser discs of Cantopop Mandopop in their garage or in their storage to call in. And so we ended up collecting over 800.
So many from the community again, and that's a sign.
It's a sign that this is a key part of people's lives and history of Canadians that lived here.
And so with my collaborator Liam Morgan, who I also worked with on the Wayang spaceship, we have come up with this structure that consists of 12 metal arms that reach from the floor right up to the ceiling. They are angled. They have two joints, and they're angled in different directions. And each arm has, I think, about 8 laser discs along its length. So you have to imagine the structure that had 8 arms reaching towards the sky. It's like tentacles of an octopus reaching up.
That's how I describe it.
And the laser discs are kind of like the suckers on the tentacles.
Exactly.
And there's a program where the light bulbs that are connected to each and every laser disc are glowing with different intensities and different colors. And this sets up a mesmerizing interplay of concentric circles of color, of light. And this is like making a painting that continually evolves over time. The other factor is that all the discs turned and focused to one vantage point, which is the middle of the stage. So as you enter, you don't actually see the full effect until you actually climb on the stage, turn around, and when you are the star on stage looking out towards the imagined audience, you encounter over 100 of these laser discs pointing directly at you with this concentric circles kind of emanating from the centers. It's kind of like a trip. It's hard to describe, and it's hard to capture with your camera. I think it's a thing that it has to be experienced.
It absolutely has to be experienced. And the karaoke was a last-minute addition to leave it there, I think we decided.
Yes, we have a karaoke machine and screen set up there, and it somehow lent something to it.
For sure.
It didn't become an abstract stage. It did become a kind of science fiction-esque representation of a karaoke lounge. The other thing which I wanted to mention was that the structure, as we've described, it's like tentacles of an octopus reaching up towards the sky, and the discs get as you go higher along the arms, they get denser and denser, and so most of the color and light are coming from above. And when I had to think of a title for the work, I did think that it was really looking up at the universe, at the cosmos. I also felt connections to things rising up from the ocean. I also saw the interplay of colors as voices and echoes that maybe reach across oceans and across the universe. And for me, it's symbolic of the journeys taken by our pioneering forefathers who had made all these treacherous journeys in search of better lives across oceans. And so I used the title borrowed from a song from the group Beyond from Hong Kong, quite a landmark a song, and it's called, well, in Chinese it's called 海闊天空.
海闊天空, yeah. In
海闊天空.
yeah,
in English, it's
that.
vast oceans, endless skies.
Mhm.
And the song is kind of like an anthem for freedom, for a journey of an individual's freedom, and it's played a significant role in Hong Kong popular culture over several decades. So I thought it was an apt title to connect to our shared history.
I think it definitely is something that needs to be experienced, and the show just opened a couple days ago, so I hope all of you can come and experience this. Ming, you're off to London next. Could you tell us a little bit more about your next project and what you're doing in London?
Yeah, so I'm really happy to have been selected to be the artist in residence at the National Gallery in London. It's a residency that lasts for a year. I have been given a studio to work in at the National Gallery next to the conservation department. And my task is to respond to the collection. And I've been speaking to the curators from the National Gallery who all have their different specialities, whether it's 15th century Italian painting or post-1800, the Impressionist paintings. I've gone through a kind of a masterclass in the history of Western European painting. And I'm preparing to make a reaction, a new work in response to that, which I think would be performative in some way. I'm very interested in how my colleagues talk about art, how the curators and the educators have this aspect of their work, which is to talk to the public about art. I find it totally fascinating and quite theatrical, and I feel that there's a lot of potential to heighten, I think, the performative and potential different ways of expression beyond the obvious.
I think for us as a new museum, we're always looking at different practices and thinking about ways to innovate. And it's great to hear that you will be in London and innovating different practices at the National Gallery. We look forward to seeing what happens, and we look forward to your next visit in Vancouver and learning more about the Cantonese Opera Project. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
Dream Factory, Cantopop Mandopop 1980s to 2000 is open now and on for the next year until May 31st, 2026. So you have time to come down to the Chinese Canadian Museum and see this show, as well as our show upstairs, A Soldier for All Seasons, on the third floor, which also just opened. This podcast was recorded on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We invite you all to reflect on the territories that you're on and the host nations and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. To learn more about the Chinese Canadian Museum and book tickets, visit us at ChineseCanadianMuseum.ca and follow us on Instagram at ccmuseumbc for updates. The School Room is presented by the Chinese Canadian Museum, hosted by Dr. Melissa Karmen Lee and produced by Rosalie Gunawan. Production is supported by Noah Taylor. The theme music and original audio was created by Joshua Young, and graphic design is by Studio Pian Pian He and Max Harvey. Stay tuned for next month's episode of The School Room, available wherever you get your podcasts.